Wow. Thank you, everyone. Great to be back at the Blue Earth Summit. Thank you, Keme. Good to see so many of you, a much bigger conference this year. And delighted to be back to talk about this issue. Wake up and smell the pollution, how we get environmental regeneration up to the top of the public agenda, which I think is so topical. I've just come back from Labour Party conference where it certainly was at the top of the agenda. I'm delighted to be here with Danielle Mulder, Group Sustainability Director of the BBC, in charge of net zero and nature positive, which we're going to hear more about today. Also, a long history in sustainability with KPMG and working with big brands, KFC, Burger King, London 2012, and many others, some of which we might associate with sustainability and others which we might not associate with sustainability. So really excited about having this conversation and how we truly make the environment an issue for the public and make sure that people can be fully engaged. We're going to talk about two big issues today, Danielle, particularly the sewage debate and plastic pollution. But first and foremost, I wanted to ask you, particularly on net zero and nature positive at the BBC, how are you taking these issues forward? How are you embedding them with the broadcaster behind the scenes, but also in front of the scenes with the public? How are you taking these messages to the public and building them up into the public narrative?
Yeah, no problem at all. I think we have got a couple of slides, if that's okay, just to click through them. But yeah, so the way we think about this, there we go, at the BBC, is we have three pillars. I think
we can see it. It's all good. Can everyone see that?
Everybody see it. Great. We've got three pillars. We have net zero, nature positive, and people positive. And the net zero, hopefully everybody understands, is about when we achieve net zero as an organisation. It's obviously very climate and carbon focused. And we have had a position on that since COP26, when we actually sort of implemented what we call science-based targets. That's quite operationally focused. Yeah, it's about the BBC as an organisation and its carbon problem. And we do have a carbon problem because we use a lot of power and we use a lot of energy. The second pillar is about nature positive, and this space is very much evolving, particularly in the business space, about what does that actually mean? What does that actually mean for the BBC? There isn't a standard out there like there is for net zero with the science-based target initiative. Business wants it. Business wants there to be a standard so that they can, measure themselves against that standard and actually sort of arguably reach a position of what we call nature positivity. And essentially what it means is doing more good than harm to nature. And what we've done at the BBC to get ahead of this, and whilst we're waiting on the standards and frameworks to settle down in the biodiversity space, is we've measured it. We've measured our footprint, our biodiversity footprint, and we've also piloted some of the frameworks and really investigated some of the measurement systems. So that's the nature piece. And the two, obviously, are very operationally focused, but they do correlate. You know, the reason why we've got a problem with climate is because we're in an ecological overshoot situation and we've mismanaged nature. The third pillar, which I think is what Hugo wants to talk about today, is about people positive, which is basically the impact of our programming. And for the BBC, that's our wealth, right? That's our soft power. That's what we do as an organisation. It's actually why I joined the BBC, is to use our voice for good, yeah? To be a net positive contributor to this topic around the planetary crises that we face. And we do have, a very serious role to play. Here, it's not just here in the UK, but globally as well. We are the world's biggest public broadcaster, and some of our programming does reach Blue Planet 2, which we're going to have a little clip about, does actually reach more than a billion people. We reach consistently about 90% of the UK population. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we have a role to play, and our impact is very, very important, particularly about setting the public agenda and the public discourse that we can generate through these inciting moments through our content. What we've also learned through this process, and we understand this at the BBC, is we can give people information through our news, And by the way, we've just made a commitment in our news called the Journalism Climate Commitment. We're the first public broadcaster to do so, and we are leading on this globally as well. In our news output, we've committed to all of our news going out to be attached to the latest climate and nature science. So you will see that coming through. We'll have consistency with all of our stories in that messaging, and all of it needs to be evidence-based as well. And we also have a climate content pledge that Tim spoke to. Tim Davies, our Director General, launched at COP26 in Glasgow. And that actually pledges us to integrate, again, all the latest climate science across all of our content, yeah? Not just our natural history unit output, but also all of our output as well. And why does this matter? It matters because we want to create the conversation, the public discourse, and that role of being a responsible broadcaster in bringing this to our audiences' attention as to what's important, what's going on, what the facts are, to have a conversation around it. But we've also learned that just giving people information is not enough. It doesn't generate the change that we want. And it has to be visceral. To create a moment, there has to be an emotional connection to it. And we were just talking outside before we came on stage about how there's sometimes conflict around these issues, and that generates that emotional moment. And that works. That connection to that emotional moment, and we'll hopefully see a clip now around Blue Planet, generates the moment that people want to change their behaviour. And we saw that on Blue Planet 2, if it's okay.
Let's bring that in now, yeah.
We should do that.
The clip, I think. Yeah,
Planet 2
can we get some volume on that?
people's eyes to the damage that we are doing to our oceans and the creatures that live in them. I've been absolutely astonished at the result that programme has had. I never imagined there would be quite so many of you who would be inspired to want change.
No plastic straws!
You've been on beaches with thousands more of you than ever before picking up rubbish.
We live so close to beaches and our water, we don't really want it just to be all full of plastic.
Families have changed their habits.
For me, the Blue Planet 2 was a pivotal point. I think there are so many things that people can do.
And schools and communities across the country have searched for ways to reduce their single-use plastic footprint.
Lunchbox Challenge! Yay!
So we've moved away from single-use plastic. So all of a sudden, the 400 plates that we were wasting can be reused, washed, and reused again.
What is more, the strength of your response has not gone unnoticed in the corridors of power or business boardrooms.
More than 40 companies have signed up to an initiative to cut plastic pollution in Britain.
Plastic bottles, plastic pollution.
Tackling the scourge of plastic.
We must reduce the demand for plastic.
Coffee cups,
Plastic
The bottles, plastic chopsticks.
Everyone has woken up to the need for action.
even as far away as China, change is happening.
所以我们特地成立了这样一个蓝色星球计划。
Right now, 8 million tons of plastics ends up in our oceans every year. But you, by your responses, have shown that if we start doing those small steps that are easily achievable, we can, before long, really have an effect. If you want to join in, find out easy ways to make a difference, and share with us what you're up to. Visit bbc.co.uk/plasticswatch. The actions of any just one of us may seem to be trivial and to have no effect, but the knowledge that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are doing the same thing, that really does have an effect. So please join us.
Great.
So what an incredible piece of broadcasting. Blue Planet 2. How many of you watched Blue Planet 2? A lot of you. Some of those billion people around the world who watched it. What an incredible piece of broadcasting that was considered a plastic pollution documentary. But I understand that out of the 7 hours of broadcasting, just 14 minutes was dedicated to plastic pollution. 14 minutes that helped mobilize millions of beach clean volunteers around the world, engage governments. We saw people at the dispatch box talking about refillable solutions, about the scourge of plastic pollution. It was a really big thing. And just 4 or 5 years ago, I've come back from Labour Party conference. Had I been at Labour Party conference 4 or 5 years ago, there would have been photos of ministers with coffee cups and plastic bottles on the front pages of newspapers lambasting them. And it was so acute, it was so high up on the public agenda. It was the zeitgeist thing. But what's happened since? And what is the role of broadcasters and brands to actually sustain the pressure? Not just break it and paint the villains and the heroes in the debate, but also to sustain it through to where the solutions are. Because I'm interested in reporting back to your viewers and the public on that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, I think it surprised everybody, the reaction that we got from that 14 minutes, as you talked about, and that very emotional moment that people saw that whale, and the sadness, you know, of the impact that we're having in terms of plastic. So it wasn't like it was a premeditated, right, we're going to create this moment and then we're going to anticipate this sort of chain of events that did happen. It was fantastic that it did happen. I think we could do a better job, to be honest with you, as broadcasters in this sort of follow-up and having, you know, what has happened from that moment 5 years ago, which did generate, I mean, it worked in effect, didn't it? It generated the public discourse that we wanted to have. Everybody was talking about it. Schools were talking about it. Businesses were responding to it. We created this space. The policy changed. You know, we now have to pay for plastic bags in our shops. There's a war on single-use plastic that everybody's adopted. You're absolutely right. But sadly, I think the truth is there's still more plastic going into our oceans. So, you know, despite all of that activity and that energy and that collective action that took place, we've still got a problem. You know,
well, it's a bigger problem than ever. But I'm interested in, you know, a lot of that sort of emotional lever of these issues to help lift them up the public agenda. We saw that, you know, that clip there with the sperm whale with a piece of plastic in its mouth. Yeah. You know, those very emotional moments that trigger people into action. And we did see a lot of action. We saw, you know, beach cleaners taking to the coast around the UK and around the world. We saw people campaigning to end single-use plastics from, you know, plastic cutlery, which I think we've just seen a ban on come in recently.
Yeah.
But actually, you know, is the follow-up as media-friendly and good for the public as the hero and villain story? Because indeed, we've got huge action taking place at the UN at the moment, UN level with the Global Plastics Treaty, people coming together. And that's because of what the BBC did and what all of those volunteers and other activists did around the country. But is the follow-up story as attractive? Does it sell papers? Does it bring in viewers? Is it something we can lift into the agenda?
Sort of clickbait. I mean, we do try and cover these, you know, the continuum, and when there's big events like, you know, the global kind of plastics treaty, that will be picked up by BBC News. I mean, I think we do a pretty good job of that in terms of following a particular, you know, an event and what's happening, particularly at the global stage. You know, in terms of newspapers, I can't really comment about, you know, the written press, but there is that negativity, isn't it? Negative stories seem to sell more, which is sad, really. And you know, I don't think Blue Planet 2 was a negative piece of programming. It does try and depict more of our programming. If you look at Wild Isles, and we've got Planet Earth 3 being released as well, the focus is now shifting to not only just sort of having these beautiful photography that we have, you know, on wildlife, but also telling the story of what's happening to that and what is at risk. And actually, I think in Planet Earth 3, we've actually got some stories to be told about some of the heroes that are involved in actually protecting this beautiful planet. And we certainly did that in Wild Isles as well. So we don't shy away from the truth, but we've got to give people hope, and we've got to engage them and try and activate that public discourse. The most effective way of creating change is to get everybody talking about it, and to get that public discourse going, or that zeitgeist moment where everybody goes, right, we're into it. You know, we want clean rivers, we want
and you are doing that, you know, with the Wild Isles, which I'm sure many of the audience also saw. You know, we saw, perhaps for many people, you know, the surprising range of wildlife that we do have around the UK. Still, despite the fact that we're in one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, We still have an abundance of wildlife around Scotland, the killer whales that were filmed so beautifully for that series, and all of the other incredible wildlife. So that story of, as we said, sort of the radical sort of conflict and the heroes and villains, but then also the radical hope that people need, because sometimes that seems devoid in the space. There's lots of alarmism, there's lots of challenges we face, but do people need that radical hope as well to take them into the next phase of our challenge with sustainability and restoring our environment? Do they need more hope?